Most leaders don't fail because they lack intelligence or ambition. They fail because they choose avoidance over accountability. The uncomfortable truth is that avoiding a problem doesn't make it go away. It simply pushes it further into the culture where it quietly erodes trust, morale, and performance. In high growth organizations, accountability is not a nice to have, it's a non negotiable. And yet, time and again, leaders tell themselves a story that if they just give it more time, or wait for the issue to resolve itself, maybe it'll disappear. It won't. People notice, teams notice, results reflect it. There's this illusion that staying silent about poor performance, toxic behavior, or missed deadlines somehow preserves peace. But peace without progress is just stagnation dressed up as patience, and your team feels it. They feel it every time you walk past the underperformer who doesn't get coached. They feel it when someone shows up late to meetings and no one says a word. They feel it when there are no consequences for inconsistency. What happens next? The bar lowers, standards shift. You've silently created a culture where mediocrity is not just allowed, it's protected. Avoidance is easy. Accountability requires courage, but courage is what defines great leadership. Courage is having the hard conversation. It's telling someone the truth about how their performance is affecting the team. It's being direct and specific, even when it's uncomfortable, and it's not about being harsh or punitive. Accountability, when done well, is empowering. It's saying, I see more in you than what you're currently delivering, and I believe you can rise to the standard we've set. When leaders avoid, they rob their teams of clarity. They think they're being kind by not calling someone out. In reality, they're being unclear, and unclear is unkind. Your team deserves to know exactly where they stand. They deserve feedback that is timely, honest, and rooted in a desire to help them grow. But that only happens when accountability is a built-in part of your leadership rhythm, not something you do when things get out of hand, but something you practice consistently. This starts with the leader. You can't expect your team to own their outcomes if you're not owning yours. Are you following through on what you promised? Are you addressing the tough stuff, or are you skimming past it? Are you modeling what it means to be coachable, responsive, and consistent? Leadership is not about perfection, it's about integrity, and integrity is built when your words align with your actions, even when no one's watching, especially then. Let's be clear, people are always watching. They see when a leader disappears during a crisis. They notice when feedback is only given to certain people. They track when promotions go to favorites instead of top performers. None of it is invisible. The phrase "they thought we'd never notice" becomes the quiet chorus in an organization that lacks accountability. And when people lose trust, they disengage. Disengagement is silent, but it's deadly. You won't see it on a spreadsheet until it shows up in turnover, missed goals, and a culture that's more about survival than success. So what do? You get honest. You look at what you've been avoiding and you face it today. You have the conversation you've been putting off. You define the expectations that have been unclear. You stop tolerating what doesn't align with your mission. That's not easy work, but it's the work that transforms teams. Because when accountability becomes a leadership standard, performance becomes predictable, results become repeatable, and trust becomes unshakable. You don't have to do it perfectly, you just have to do it consistently. The teams that win are led by people who hold the line, not out of fear, but out of belief in what's possible. They hold people accountable not because they want to control them, but because they want to empower them. That's the difference. That's leadership that scales, and that's what people notice. Culture is not built in all hands meetings or on glossy mission statement posters. It's built in the everyday decisions, conversations, and behaviors of leadership. What you do as a leader, what you tolerate, what you ignore, and what you reward becomes the culture. Whether you like it or not, whether you're intentional or passive, your team is watching, and they're not just listening to what you say, they're modeling what you do. If you want a forming, accountable, growth-driven culture, you have to lead one, because culture always reflects leadership. Many leaders believe culture is something that will naturally evolve over time. That's a mistake. Culture is not a passive byproduct, it's an outcome of daily habits. And if you're not actively shaping it, it's being shaped anyway, just not in your favor. The way you respond to problems, the way you give feedback, the way you handle underperformance, all of these moments are culture defining. If you respond with avoidance, inconsistency, or frustration, you're sending a message. And your team is listening loud and clear. This is how we operate here. Think about your team. What are they mirroring? Are they energized, focused, and aligned with clear expectations? Or are they unclear, disengaged, and inconsistent? The answer doesn't lie in them, it lies in you. Your team is a reflection of your leadership standards. If there's chaos in your culture, it's likely because there's chaos in your communication. If there's a lack of urgency in your team, it may be because there's a lack of urgency in how you show up. People will always mirror what's modeled, not what's mandated. This is why it's critical to stop blaming the team for the culture you created. If there are gaps in performance or behavior, it's not just a people problem, it's a leadership gap. One of the hardest but most powerful shifts you can make as a leader is to look in the mirror and ask, where am I contributing to this issue? That's the question that unlocks growth. When you take ownership of the culture, you take control of the results. Culture is also created in the gray areas, those moments when a leader has to choose between what's easy and what's right. Do you let the top performer get away with poor behavior because they bring in the numbers? Do you allow late arrivals or missed deadlines to slide because it's uncomfortable to confront them? Every time you say nothing, you say something. You tell the team, we don't actually stand for what we say we stand for. Over time, this erodes credibility and trust. And once trust is gone, culture starts to crack. But when you hold the line, something shifts. When you consistently communicate expectations, follow through on consequences, and lead by example, you build a culture of respect. Your team knows what to expect, they know what's okay and what's not, and most importantly, they know you're leading from alignment, not emotion. Consistency is the foundation of strong culture, not hype, not charisma, consistency. And that starts with the leader. Culture doesn't mean everyone agrees all the time or that everything feels good. It means your people are aligned around a shared mission, and they know how to behave in a way that supports that mission. When leadership is clear, consistent, and courageous, culture becomes a strength. It attracts high performers, retains top talent, and drives momentum. That's the real ROI of intentional leadership. So ask yourself, what are you reinforcing with your actions? What kind of behavior are you modeling in the small, quiet moments? What do people walk away with after being in a room with you? That is your culture. That is your leadership. And if you don't like the reflection, it's not about changing the team, it's about leveling up your leadership. Because culture doesn't change when people change, it changes when leaders do. Silence is often misinterpreted as agreement, but in reality, it's more often a symptom of fear, fatigue, or disengagement. When your team isn't speaking up, it doesn't mean everything's fine. It means they've either stopped believing their voice matters or they're too uncomfortable to challenge the current narrative. That's not alignment, that's quiet resistance. Leaders who confuse silence for compliance end up blindsided when performance drops, turnover spikes, or trust quietly erodes behind the scenes. The truth is, just because no one is raising their hand doesn't mean they're on board. You don't get real buy-in through forced smiles in meetings or head nods during announcements. You get buy-in when people feel safe enough to speak honestly, challenge ideas, and contribute without fear of backlash. That kind of environment isn't created by accident. It's created by design. It's built through intentional leadership that values transparency over control, curiosity over ego, and truth over comfort. Silence is not the goal, engagement is, and engagement only happens in a culture where people know their input won't be punished or ignored. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is assuming that if no one's bringing up issues, there are no issues. That's naive. High performers don't waste time complaining. They watch, they take mental notes, they see the patterns, and if they feel that speaking up will lead to tension, judgment, or being labeled difficult, they'll simply opt out. They'll do their job, hit the minimums, and mentally check out. This is how organizations end up with teams that are technically compliant but completely disconnected. They're present, but they're not contributing. They're in the room, but they've left the mission. You can't fix what people are too afraid to say, and you can't lead a team you refuse to listen to. If people aren't sharing concerns, it's not always because they don't have any. It's often because they don't trust that their concerns will be heard or acted upon. This is why creating feedback loops is critical. Not once a year in a survey, not quarterly in a performance review, but regularly, consistently, and in real time. Make it a part of the culture to ask, what's not working? What are we missing? How can we do better? And then, this part matters, actually do something with the answers. Feedback without action breeds cynicism. It tells people, we heard you, but we're not willing to change. Eventually, they stop giving feedback, not because they're satisfied, but because they're exhausted. Exhausted from repeating themselves, exhausted from being dismissed, exhausted from watching nothing change. This emotional fatigue is the death of engagement, and once engagement dies, performance follows. It's also important to understand that not all silence is passive. Sometimes silence is a form of protest. It's someone choosing not to contribute because they no longer believe in the direction of the company. It's someone holding back their best ideas because they're tired of being overlooked. It's someone opting out of accountability because they've learned that standards only apply selectively. This kind of silence is loud. It just doesn't use words. It shows up in missed deadlines, minimal effort, and a slow erosion of initiative. And when leaders ignore it, they're not neutral, they're complicit. The fix isn't more meetings or motivational speeches. The fix is real leadership, leadership that invites hard conversations, leadership that listens without defensiveness, leadership that says, I don't have all the answers, but I'm committed to figuring this out with you. That level of humility doesn't weaken authority, it strengthens trust. And trust is the foundation of any high-performing team. So if your team is quiet, don't assume they're aligned. Ask better questions, look deeper, and most of all, examine your own role. Are you creating a space where people feel heard, respected, and empowered? Or are you unintentionally shutting down the very voices that could help you lead better? Because in the end, silence doesn't mean everything's okay. It often means everything's at risk. One of the biggest leadership blind spots is underestimating the awareness and intelligence of your team. Too often, leaders assume that just because something hasn't been said out loud, it hasn't been noticed. That's a mistake. Your team sees everything. They pick up on every inconsistency, every double standard, every shift in energy, and every decision that doesn't match the values you claim to uphold. They may not always say it, but they see it, they process it, and they form opinions around it. Your team is smarter than you think, and assuming otherwise creates distance and distrust. People are incredibly perceptive. They notice when you give preferential treatment to certain employees. They notice when goals are moving targets with no explanation. They see when someone gets away with missing deadlines while others are held to the fire. They observe the way you handle conflict, whether you shy away from it or address it directly. They are constantly reading the room, gauging your tone, watching your consistency, and drawing conclusions. If your words and actions don't align, they won't call you out. They'll just stop trusting you. That loss of trust rarely happens in a single moment. It's a slow drip of disappointments, contradictions, and missed opportunities for leadership. Maybe it starts with a vague response to a direct question. Then it's the lack of follow-up after promising to take action. Eventually, it's a big decision made without any communication or context. When these moments pile up, the message your team receives is clear. Transparency is optional, and leadership isn't interested in clarity. At that point, your most capable people start mentally disengaging, even if they continue to show up physically. Smart teams don't need to be micromanaged. They need to be led with clarity and trust. They crave purpose, alignment, and a sense that their contribution matters. When those things are missing, they'll still do their jobs, but without ownership. And ownership is the difference between people who simply complete tasks and people who drive outcomes. When your team feels underestimated, underutilized, or undervalued, they stop giving their best. Not because they can't, but because they've learned that doing more won't make a difference. Leaders sometimes assume that withholding information is a form of protection. The idea is that people don't need to know everything, that certain details will just confuse them or distract them from their roles, but that's not respect, that's control, and it doesn't create loyalty. It creates suspicion, forming people want context. They want to understand the why behind the what. They want to know how their role connects to the bigger picture. And when you give them that visibility, you unlock innovation, ownership, and real momentum. You also need to recognize that your team is watching how you lead, not just what you say. They notice when you deflect blame instead of owning mistakes. They see when you show up differently for different people. They can tell when you're overwhelmed, distracted, or checked out. You don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be self-aware, because your leadership sets the emotional tone for the entire team. If you're defensive, they'll stop being honest. If you're inconsistent, they'll stop relying on your direction. And if you treat them like they can't handle the truth, they'll stop giving you theirs. The good news, when you lead with transparency, consistency, and respect, your team rises, they contribute more, they think bigger, they solve problems before you even know they exist, because smart people don't want to be managed. They want to be challenged, supported, and trusted. They want leaders who see their potential and call them to a higher standard. When you lead with that belief, your team will not only meet expectations, they'll exceed them. So stop underestimating what your people see, know, and are capable of. Assume they're aware. Assume they're paying attention, and lead in a way that earns their respect, not just their compliance, because your team is smarter than you think, and they deserve leadership that honors that truth. Visibility is not about ego or control, it's about clarity, alignment, and leadership. What you choose to see, track, and address defines the trajectory of your team and your culture. When leaders aren't looking closely at what's really happening in their organization, they make decisions in the dark, they guess, they assume, they hope things are on track, but hope is not a strategy. And in high-performance environments, what gets ignored eventually becomes what gets repeated. Visibility is power, and when you lose it, you lose control of the outcomes. Too many leaders operate at a distance, thinking that being hands-off is the respectful or empowering approach. But distance is not the same as trust. You can trust your team and still maintain clear sightlines into what's happening every day. You can empower people and still inspect the work. Great leaders don't assume things are fine, they verify. They look at the numbers, they evaluate the progress, they sit in the meetings, and they ask hard questions. That's not micromanagement, that's leadership with intentional awareness. When you stop paying attention, you send the message that details don't matter. You allow small issues to become systemic problems. A missed deadline here, an unclear process there, and soon you have a team that's off track, out of sync, and confused about what really matters. Visibility allows you to catch the drift before it turns into a detour. It gives you the information you need to correct quickly, coach effectively, and lead proactively. And visibility isn't just about what's going wrong, it's also about recognizing what's going right. When leaders are disconnected, they miss opportunities to reinforce great performance. They don't see the extra effort, the smart decisions, the quiet wins that deserve to be acknowledged. Recognition is a form of feedback, and it's a powerful tool in any culture. But you can't celebrate what you don't see. When you're present, engaged, and observant, you build a culture of appreciation as much as a culture of accountability. There's also a personal dimension to visibility. Your team needs to see you, not just in big moments or when problems arise, but consistently. Consistency builds trust. People are more willing to follow leaders who are in the trenches, who understand the day-to-day, who ask questions because they care, not because they're checking a box. Leadership presence doesn't mean hovering over people, it means showing up regularly enough that your team knows you're connected to the mission, the goals, and their work. It's easy to get lost in your inbox, your calendar, or the next big initiative. But real leadership happens in the present moment. It happens when you're paying attention to what's working, what's not, and what your people need most right now. Avoiding this responsibility creates blind spots. And blind spots are dangerous, not because you're unaware of the truth, but because you've chosen not to see it. The longer you ignore something, the more power it gains, and the harder it becomes to fix. The good news is that visibility is a choice. You don't need a special tool or title to start seeing clearly. You need to ask better questions. You need to look at the data without making excuses for it. You need to walk through the halls, attend the meetings, and engage with your people, not to control them, but to understand them. Visibility creates connection, it builds context, and with context, you make better decisions. When you lead with visibility, your team notices, they feel your presence, they know you're invested, and that creates a powerful ripple effect. People become more aligned, more engaged, and more accountable. Not because they're being watched, but because they're being led. When you see clearly, you lead clearly, and clear leadership always drives better results. So if things feel messy, inconsistent, or unclear, start by looking closer, because the answers are usually right in front of you. Visibility isn't just about staying informed, it's about staying in control. That's not micromanagement, that's powerful leadership.